Margaret Theresa's entire existence was orchestrated for the sake of political survival. Born into the highly inbred Spanish Habsburg dynasty, she was seen less as a child and more as a future bride, an instrument to preserve power through intermarriage. Her marriage to her uncle was intended to reinforce the Habsburg grip on both the Spanish and Austrian thrones. This union, however, came at a personal cost. It exacerbated the dynasty's already fragile genetic health and underscored the limited autonomy royal women had over their own lives. She became Empress at just 15, and by 21 she was dead. Her body ravaged by illness, repeated pregnancies, and the crushing weight of expectation. Margaret Theresa of Spain was born on the 12th of July 1651 at the Royal Alcazar Palace in Madrid. Her father, King Philip IV, had ruled Spain since 1621 after ascending to the throne. Margaret's mother was Maria Anna of Austria, daughter of Ferdinand III, Duke of Austria and Holy Roman Emperor. Both of her parents belonged to the powerful House of Habsburg, a dynasty that emerged from the rugged borderlands of Austria and Switzerland during the medieval era. Over the years, the Habsburgs expanded their influence across much of Europe. Not through relentless warfare, but by mastering the strategic use of marriage as a political tool. They forged alliances that enabled them to seize vast empires, and by the late century, they had inherited the Spanish throne, becoming Europe's most unstoppable force, a family whose power knew no bounds. The Habsburgs weren't just known for their vast empire, they were infamous for their dangerous obsession with inbreeding. Generation after generation, they married within their own bloodline to maintain dynastic control and keep land and power within the family at the cost of their own health. This twisted tradition led to detrimental effects on the Habsburg gene pool, resulting in various health issues, including epilepsy, insanity, and early death, ultimately crippling their dynasty from within. Margaret's parents were not just distantly related, they were far closer than anyone should be. Her father was from the Spanish branch of the family, her mother from the Austrian side, but their connection ran much deeper. In a shocking display of royal inbreeding, they were uncle and niece. This extreme level of inbreeding came at a tragic cost. Of their 5 children, 3 died in infancy. Only 2 survived, Margaret and her younger brother, Charles II. But survival did not mean escape from the consequences. Charles was a walking testament to the horrors of inbreeding. By his 20s, he was prematurely aged, balding, and plagued by a grotesquely deformed jaw. His mind seemed to wither as quickly as his body, showing signs of early dementia. He would later earn the nickname El Hechizado, the Bewitched, as many believed his profound afflictions were the result of dark magic. In reality, the explanation lay in genetics. The inbreeding coefficient for Charles and Margaret was alarmingly high, comparable to that of a child born to siblings, highlighting the dangerous extremes to which the Habsburgs went in their pursuit of dynastic purity. To this day, historians continue to debate the true cause of Charles's condition. Was it purely genetic, the inevitable outcome of centuries of relentless inbreeding, or something more enigmatic? While Margaret appeared to have escaped the worst of her family's genetic legacy, she was not entirely untouched. Healthier than her brother, she still bore the weight of the so-called Habsburg curse in her own way, as we would come to see. Margaret was raised in the grandeur of the Royal Alcazar Palace, a world of opulence where every desire was met by a retinue of maids and attendants. Yet beneath the gilded surface of royal life lay a world of rigid formality. The court in Madrid was governed by suffocating etiquette, where every gesture, every word, every glance was meticulously choreographed by centuries-old tradition. As a princess of the powerful Habsburg dynasty, Margaret received the finest education that wealth and influence could offer. She was tutored in multiple languages, including German, essential for communicating with her Austrian relatives, and even learned some Latin. But no amount of education could prepare her for the fate that lay ahead. As she grew older, Margaret couldn't help but notice the striking age difference between her parents. Her father was nearly 30 years older than her mother. If this fact unsettled her, she never let it show. Regardless of the age gap, her parents adored her. She was their treasured gem, the only truly healthy child to come from their controversial union, and they lavished her with attention and affection. With her delicate features and vibrant spirit, Margaret effortlessly charmed everyone around her. She was their little angel, a nickname whispered with affection by family and courtiers alike. Perhaps it was this adoration that led her parents to commission Diego Velázquez, one of Europe's greatest artists, to immortalize her in a stunning portrait when she was just 5 years old. That painting would later become one of the most iconic works in art history. The painting was once known as La Familia, the family. Today, it is called Las Meninas, meaning the ladies in waiting. This title is far more fitting, as it depicts young Margaret surrounded by her ladies in waiting, court dwarfs, and a mastiff, while Velázquez himself is seen at his easel, possibly painting the king and queen, whose reflections appear faintly in a mirror at the back of the room. The composition blurs the lines between reality and illusion, private and public, artist and subject. While the painting is celebrated for its complexity and innovation, it also holds a deeper, more tragic meaning when viewed through the lens of Margaret's short life. To the modern mind, it may seem difficult to comprehend, but by the time Las Meninas was painted in 1656, 5-year-old Margaret was already at the centre of strategic discussions at the Spanish court concerning her future marriage. In the calculated realm of royal politics, marriage was rarely about love. Instead, it served as a powerful tool to forge alliances, secure influence, and shape the fate of empires. Personal feelings were secondary in a world where dynastic survival was paramount. As the daughter of the King of Spain, Margaret wasn't just a mere princess. She was a pivotal chess piece in the ruthless game of European diplomacy, her fate determined long before she could comprehend it. At one point, there was even a proposal for Margaret to marry Charles Stuart of the English royal family. In 1660, Charles was restored to the throne as King Charles II of England, Scotland and Ireland, following England's brief experiment with republicanism during the 1650s. A marriage between Margaret and Charles would have represented a surprising alliance between Spain and England, at a time when France and Spain were fierce rivals for dominance in Western Europe. Ultimately, however, Charles married Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese princess, in 1662. The collapse of the marriage negotiations between Margaret and Charles Stuart was largely due to King Philip's opposition. He was firmly convinced that his daughter should marry within the Austrian branch of the Habsburg family. He appeared to show no concern whatsoever that such a marriage would further deepen the family's inbreeding. After all, this was simply how the Habsburgs maintained their grip on power. As for Margaret, she had no voice in the matter. When talks between Madrid and Vienna began, she was likely blissfully unaware of the far-reaching and unsettling consequences this union would eventually bring. Margaret was still only 11 years old when it was announced at the royal court that she would marry Leopold of the House of Habsburg. Like her mother before her, she was now bound to continue the Habsburgs' long-standing tradition of dynastic intermarriage. Her future husband was both her first cousin and her uncle. Leopold was her mother's younger brother. By the late 1650s, Leopold had rapidly ascended to several powerful titles, becoming Archduke of Austria, King of Hungary, Croatia and Bohemia, and ultimately Holy Roman Emperor. Even in early modern Europe, there were certain standards regarding the appropriate age for marriage. Margaret was betrothed to her uncle in early 1663, but she was considered too young for the union to proceed at that time. It wasn't until April 1666, just before her 15th birthday, that she departed Madrid for Vienna. A 6-month journey followed, and the Spanish royal party finally arrived in Vienna in December 1666. The wedding took place just days later on December 12th, in a lavish ceremony attended by many of Europe's most powerful royals and dignitaries. No expense was spared. The celebrations continued well into 1667, marked by grandeur and spectacle. Yet, behind the splendour, a darker fate was already unfolding. Life in Vienna would prove to be strange and at times difficult for Margaret. It might surprise modern readers, but Margaret and Leopold didn't shy away from acknowledging their close blood relationship. She openly referred to him as uncle. Despite the unusual nature of their union, the two reportedly got along well. They shared interests in art and music, and Leopold made a genuine effort to ensure Margaret felt comfortable in her new environment. It was also customary for royal brides like Margaret, when leaving their homeland to marry a foreign ruler, to bring members of their household staff with them. As a result, she would have been surrounded by familiar faces at the Viennese court, perhaps even some who had been present in Madrid when Las Meninas was painted years earlier. Still, Margaret struggled with homesickness. She clung tightly to her Spanish identity and made little effort to learn German, a clear sign of how deeply she missed the world she had left behind. As time went on, Margaret's once delicate beauty began to fade. Her complexion grew paler, her features took on a fatigued look, and the distinct Habsburg jaw became increasingly pronounced. The marriage was troubled in other ways too. Shortly after arriving in Vienna, Margaret became pregnant and gave birth to a son, Ferdinand, in September 1667. Tragically, he lived only 3.5 months, passing away in January 1668. Hopes were briefly renewed with the birth of a daughter, Maria Antonia, in January 1669, Margaret's only child, who would survive into adulthood. Two others were not so fortunate. A son, John Leopold, was born on February 20th, 1670, but died within hours. Another daughter, Maria Anna, lived just 2 weeks before passing away in February 1672. This heartbreaking pattern of loss foreshadowed what lay ahead. Margaret's repeated pregnancies and the deaths of her children were compounded by her own declining health. Though she had been healthier than her brother during childhood, her condition began to deteriorate in the years before and after her arrival in Vienna. The physical toll of royal duty, childbirth, and emotional grief gradually wore her down. When Margaret arrived in the Austrian capital in late 1666, people there quickly began commenting on her frequent illnesses. At first, many attributed her frailty to the relentless demands of pregnancy. In just 6 years, she endured 6 pregnancies, 4 live births, and 2 miscarriages, each one leaving her physically weaker and more depressed than before. But over time, it became clear that something more serious was afflicting her. Even when she wasn't pregnant, Margaret was often confined to bed. Physicians eventually diagnosed her with an enlarged thyroid gland. In the 17th century, there was no effective treatment, and her health steadily declined. Her condition worsened dramatically. In the early spring of 1673, she suffered from severe stomach pains that lasted 3 weeks, followed by a persistent fever. Foreign ambassadors at the Viennese court noted in their reports the growing fear that she might not survive. By early March, Margaret was struggling to breathe. On March 10th, a confessor was summoned to hear her final confession and administer the sacrament. Just 2 days later, Margaret passed away at the tender age of 21. An autopsy revealed a final, devastating truth. She had been carrying another child, a baby boy, at the time of her death. Margaret's short and sorrow-filled life ended in the grandeur of the imperial crypt in Vienna, where she was laid to rest, far from the land she once called home. The death of Archduchess Margaret, Holy Roman Empress, plunged the Austrian court into an extended period of mourning. Funeral rites and commemorations continued well into April, reflecting both her high status and the shock of her untimely passing. Leopold was reportedly devastated by the loss of his young wife, yet grief could not halt the demands of dynasty. By the end of that same year, Leopold remarried, this time to Archduchess Claudia Felicitas of Austria from the Tyrolese branch of the Habsburg family. It was a union born not of love but of necessity. The dynastic game pressed on, and heirs, especially male ones, were urgently needed to secure the continuity of Habsburg rule. Following Margaret's death, her claim to the Spanish throne passed to her only surviving child, Maria Antonia. Upon Maria's own death in 1692, her rights were inherited by her son, Prince Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria, a child who would become a central figure in the succession crisis that followed. However, the sudden death of Joseph in 1699, combined with King Charles II's failure to produce an heir, ignited a full-blown succession crisis. The result was a brutal conflict that engulfed Spain and much of Europe in the War of the Spanish Succession, a bloody struggle that would last nearly 15 years. It was a crisis that perhaps might have been avoided had the Habsburgs not weakened their own bloodline through generations of incestuous marriages, a strategy that ultimately contributed to their dynastic decline.